It's Where Life.
We're live?
Yep.
Yeah, so I grew up there, and like I went to New York a bunch of times, but
I'm supposed to go like this, right? Is this thing on?
yeah, exactly. And that's my deepest regret.
You certainly can. So long as he gives us enough slack.
Oh, is this thing on?
Hi everyone, welcome to the third panel in our summer series. This will be the last panel. My name is Kylie and I'm in charge of the Blue Collar Post Collective West. Yay! You can go back and watch the last two panels on YouTube, on the Sim Group's YouTube channel if you'd like. They were really great. And we see a lot of new faces here, so I think a lot of people are discovering them. Our next meetup is going to be October 1st, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's going to be really great because one of our co-founders, Katie Hinson, is coming from New York all the way here for the meetup.
Check it.
And it's going to be really great to see her before she moves back to New Zealand. So you should all come out. The Powder Room, 6 p.m., October 1st. There's a Facebook event for that. So now we're going to go ahead and get started. If you want, Norman's going to probably make this pretty interactive so you can throw out questions, but I'll let him handle that. But you can also tweet stuff with BCPC West, that hashtag, or you can just, get on the YouTube stream on your phone, which would be really meta. So yeah, thanks for coming for this discussion. I think it's really important for young people and established professionals. All right.
You kid with your internets today. So, I'm speaking about you. So thank you all for being here today, much appreciated. I've been asked to participate in and to help moderate a panel on, shocking, ageism in the industry, in particular in the post-production industry. So I've been experiencing ageism for the last 70,000 years. Yes, I'm that old. So we're going to talk about a number of things because I believe that ageism is not just about old, it's also about young, and it's about how we treat each other. And we're going to get into a lot of discussion, I hope, up here and with you. As Kylie said, I like these things to be interactive. So for all, can the people on the feed see the group here?
Yep.
No? Not us? Okay, great. So for the 3,000 people who are here, had to check first. And for all of you watching this, please tweet and send in your questions because that's how it's going to get really interesting. So first what I'd like to do is in traditional fashion is to let everybody introduce themselves. And why don't we start down at the end? Harlan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Harlan Doolittle. I'm a data I/O technician at Encore here in Hollywood. I've been working in the television industry for the past year and a half, and my favorite color is lavender.
Thank you for sharing.
Anytime.
Right, and what's your favorite TV show?
RuPaul's Drag Race.
There we go.
Obviously.
We had to get the whole now. Maybe we'll all say our favorite. Okay. Elon.
Hi, my name is Elin Arnold. I moved to LA almost a year ago now to pursue post-production sound, specifically Foley. And I most recently worked as a voiceover engineer at the New York Film Academy. And my favorite color is blue. So.
Yeah.
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 Hi, my name's Megan Wilbur. I'm an editor at Conan O'Brien's Midnight Show. I've lived in LA for 3 years now, and my favorite color is mauve.
That's my favorite character on the TV show, too.
Mauve is
Okay, so we're off to a great start here. My name is Norman Holland. I've been an editor on features, television, branded content, sponsored, well, that's the same thing, music videos for a whole bunch of years. And now I teach at the USC Film School So I get a chance to see, and have been, as I said, I get a chance to see people moving out into the industry, as well as people who've been in the industry for a long time. And let me be very clear, when I say the industry, I think we have to say that that's not just traditional features in TV, that it includes any kind of entertainment or any kind of works which use moving images. That's, I think, what I want to really posit, because there's so many different places for us to move to. But I do want to start with a little story of, I remember always being sort of the young person in the editing room, and I would go in and there were all of these people surrounding me who were very accomplished and had won awards and all of that. And then one day I went into the cutting room and all of a sudden I was the oldest in the cutting room. I don't know how that happened. It seemed like it just happened overnight. But very slowly what tends to happen is people rise up. So knowing that we're all going to be both the youngest and the oldest in what we do at some point, we hope, I wanted to basically start by talking about a few things. So first of all, yesterday I spent a half a day at USC where I teach involved in a learning event around issues of diversity, or as we prefer to call it, inclusiveness. And that's across all of the isms, racism, sexism. We did talk a little bit about ageism. And what I wanted to start off is by asking you, you notice that these are three people at varying stages in their careers. These are three people who are in different parts of the industry as well. So it's all that. What sort of ageism have you observed as you began in the industry and started moving up? What have you observed, either experienced yourself or observed in other people as you've moved into the, as you've moved through your career? So, Carl, why don't we start with you?
Okay.
You will regret sitting on the end.
I already do. So my experience working in post-production for television, just within the past, like I moved to LA about a year and a half ago, like in July, and just in my experience as a PA, as an assistant editor, and as an IO technician now, I've noticed that on the older end of the spectrum, a few older people are being let go because they can't necessarily work fast, or like, that's not necessarily true. They are perceived as not working as fast with new technology as younger people, even though they have this, obviously extensive decades worth of, knowledge and experience in post. So I've kind of noticed that where.
Would you say that perception, I like that word perception, and we'll come back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that perception has some validity to it?
I think to a degree, it depends on a case-by-case basis, but for the most part, it's sort of like sometimes people in post are valued for really specific reasons, and they're valued for how they kind of compare, like stack up against other people, especially the smaller post houses. So that kind of pressure can affect someone's longevity in post, especially if they're on the older end of the spectrum, and especially if they cost more than younger people who are just getting into the industry and who are, wide-eyed and don't have kids and, are willing to take a lower salary. So on that end of the spectrum, I've noticed that a little bit, where seasoned professionals are getting let go because there's cheaper labor that's being brought in to replace them. And on the younger end of the spectrum, I've noticed it a little bit where young people who might have enough experience to become something more advanced than what's being provided to them, or to be trained into something that they're capable of doing with the experience that they have, are placed in low-paying PA positions for years at a time before they're kind of allowed to have that rite of passage to enter an actually technical position. So I've kind of noticed that on the lower end of the spectrum a little bit. That has a little bit more validity to it, I think, because you know, you kind of have to see how the beast works in order to understand and drive it. But at the same time, I've noticed it where people are kind of kept back a little bit, even when they're performing beyond their means. So yeah.
Yeah, so when I first started, the union regulations out here, to a lesser degree in New York, but out here were you spent a certain number of years as an apprentice. You could not edit, you couldn't assist. That job does barely even exist now. And then it was, I think, 3 years, and then you spent 5 years as an assistant before you were allowed to edit at all. So it was 8 years before you could officially take a union gig editing. And that was for exactly some of the reasons you talked about, so you could see what the lay of the land was, really learn the politics of where you were doing, what you were doing. So to some degree, I think that that's very true even today from what you're saying. Megan, it looks like you want to, we're not going to jump over you too much.
It's the journeyman system. And so people forget that a guild means you have completed a certain amount of work and you are now vetted as being part, you know, a certain standing in the guild. Those are your journeyman years.
Right. The
Spend-
idea
yeah.
being you get
travel
to a
from
certain point and
apprentice.
prove it.
Yeah, you've accumulated experience and skills.
Well, so you're 2 years out of SCAD now, right? The Savannah College of Art and Design. So that kind of must suck if you have to beat down some doors because you don't have that experience that Harlan was talking about. Does
Yeah,
it? What's your experience?
That's true. I mean, it's kind of like an unpaid internship is our starter job. And I have gone through internships, and that's actually how I've got my first job was through an internship. I didn't expect it, but it just turned out that way. But I have experienced more recently, actually, the ageism on the younger spectrum. More recently, I was asked to come into my supervisor's office, and they were asking if I could take on more responsibilities and would I want to do more work. And then I said, you know, I was very interested, but the room went quiet, and then I said, well, will there be additional compensation for this work? And I did that because I knew my own worth in the job. I knew that the reason I was being called in was because my coworkers had spoken highly of me, and my supervisors knew I was excelling at my job. And they said, well, no, there won't be additional compensation, but that's a valid question. I said, and then he told me his reasons were that the job description wasn't changing, and that the job description wasn't changing, and that, sorry, I'm blanking right now.
Yeah, well, I would blank too if in fact I was
Well, it was
told you
confusing.
get to do more for the same amount of money.
Right, so, and he said he wants to see if I can do the work. And that was really confusing because at that point in time, I did feel like I was being taken advantage of because of possibly my age. And he may have thought, well, I should feel so lucky just to be offered more work. And I felt like I was in a position to ask that question. And that was my experience more recently with, you know, feeling the discrimination because of my age.
So not to confuse the issue here, but let's confuse it a little bit.
Sorry.
Do you think that your boss would have taken the same approach if you were a man?
That's a good question because most of my coworkers are men, and I basically work among men. And I'm not sure. I mean, my supervisor was a man, but my other supervisor was a woman. So I don't know. I think that it was more about my age and the fact that I had just moved to LA, and this was my first job in LA, and maybe I wasn't going to be prepared to handle the situation, but I was, because I thought about it and I talked about it with my close friends before the meeting, and had enough of a strategy, I guess, walking into it. But I mean, we aren't necessarily prepared for those conversations.
Okay. So I think that this is an additional piece that we could add to the puzzle about when are you ready to move up? How do people move up if they're not given a chance? And do people, historically for years, even in the union system, you started to do things over your pay grade just to move forward. So I think that's ageism also, just how you trust and move up. Now what about you? So you've been doing a lot of work in TV for many, many, many years.
For many years, I started I did sort of, it wasn't a union gig, but it was structured like a formal old school apprenticeship. I started when I was 15 as a runner in a post house, and I sat with the editors and I sort of did an apprenticeship. But they paid me money because I was completing tasks. And so like to me what's interesting about this, and you both touched on this, is the perception of value at a certain age. So how do we value and charge for our work? How do I value myself as a person, as a worker? And how do I value my technical skills? How do I value my experience? Something that's striking to me is, if any of you remember the dot-com boom of the late 90s, early 2000s, what was really interesting about that was that possibly the first time, I don't know, I'm not an economist nor a historian, but there was something really interesting and unique about the dot-com boom, which is that you had all of these large corporations, a lot of whom had maybe slept on this internet thing, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, we gotta get on this, we gotta have a web strategy, we gotta have a whatever, we need to hire some kids. That was basically the thinking. And people were like, oh, it's the new economy, we're moving towards a knowledge-based economy, and what does that mean? That you as the worker, you're not just showing up and making sure that the lever gets pushed every 3 minutes to stamp the thing. You're not just completing a task. You're not just a skilled worker, you're a worker who's being paid not just for the skills that you have, knowing your NLE, knowing which button to push, but you're being paid for your experience and your craft and your wisdom that you've accumulated over time. So what's interesting about that is that knowledge and wisdom used to be accumulated over time, so there was this idea wrapped up in it that the older you get, the more you've worked, the more experience and wisdom you have. Well, all of a sudden all these companies needed to understand how the computers and the internets worked, and they're looking at all these 19-year-old, 20-year-old college kids because they're like, oh crap, you guys are so cutting edge. We don't know what language you're speaking, but we know what we want from you as an end product. So they're hiring all these young people because all of a sudden the idea of value was, well, it's the young people who are valuable because they understand this new thing. And older workers were suddenly being a little less valued, maybe. I don't know, I'm sure there's tons of studies that have been done on this. But in broad strokes... There are a few,
and let me whip a couple of them out here.
Yeah, I'm not so good with details, but in broad strokes, I know this has been studied and documented, that there was a shift in perception, and people were starting to lay off older workers and hire more younger workers, and they started to see fringe benefits from this. Do you want to lay down some facts?
Yeah, let me lay down some facts for you.
Actually, a lot of cost savings there.
So we've discussed, to some degree, the way in which new and younger people move up. Before I get into some of the numbers and the facts, let me sort of toss this in from the other side of this. Now, if I see one more picture of a whole bunch of hipsters or millennials or whatever on their phones, not talking to each other, just rows of people on phones, I'm gonna go nuts, right? So that is the perception.
So ageist.
But that, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That is the perception that a lot of older people have of the younger generation. Right? Let me flip that around. So the other side of that, our older people are set in their ways, unwilling, unable to change, just like my dad kind of thing. They have memory issues, whatever your names are not familiar with some of the newer art forms, technologies, music, all of that. In fact, so there was several years ago, there was actually a lawsuit that the Writers Guild of America filed against the studios for ageism. The Writers Guild ended up winning that suit, and every writer who was over the age of 40, that's hilarious, but over the age of 40 got like $1.50 or something like that. But a law professor at UCLA talked about that and said, at the end of the day, studios believe they need to tap into younger minds to get the best scripts and the best ideas, and that's not likely to change. Is that true in post-production as well? Is there a perception among people who we work with that the only way to provide for the market of people who watch Conan, for the people who are going every weekend to see in the theaters or turning on their Netflix, is that still perceived among post-production people? Gotta be younger in order to get it. What's your perception?
To a degree, I think that's true. I don't think, from my experience, I haven't completely seen that. It's kind of more with the younger people, from my perception, it's been that we should hire younger people because they'll work harder for less money, sort of. Because a lot of young people, unfortunately, don't really know the worth of their technical skills. And, you know, I've worked with assists and people who are in their early 20s, like 20, 21, 22, who are just remarkable. They're avid genius, like savants. I just look at them and I'm just like, how does your brain twirl and do 5 pirouettes in a millisecond like that? Like, that's crazy. And those people are great, but a lot of those people will go home and continue to work without any extra compensation for that extra time that they've worked because they just love doing that. They could do it all day and all night. And the people who employ them are fine just kind of looking the other way. So from my perception, that sets a little bit of an unfair standard, not by the young person who's doing all of that work, but by the employer who's kind of allowing it to happen, because then people who are older and who have more responsibilities in their personal lives, like families, or who just physically can't work for 18 hours a day because bodies decay, like, it's sort of unfair to those people because, you know, like people, like managers and people who are in post-production in those positions of power are fine with getting more things done for cheaper than actually having a level playing field.
Is this true of all parts of post-production? I can't imagine.
I don't think it's true for all parts of post-production. It's things that I've noticed in pockets of non-union post-production. So it's not universal, but it's certainly there.
I mean, are people in jobs interchangeable that way in their minds? Is it all types of jobs?
I think there's a perception that workers have been commodified, definitely, as I think, and again, I'll bring it back to the tech thing. There's this perception that there's a magic edit button, things go faster, we're tapeless, things don't take as long. Well, they do. We all know that. It still takes pretty much the same amount of time to back up a camera card. You know, you don't have to bring it to the lab and stuff, but there's other tasks that take time. It's, you know, it's definitely faster, but it's not like you can do everything wave a magic wand style. But yeah, there is this drive to get that is more task oriented now. So it kind of doesn't matter who the body is, and because of that, there's this interesting combination where the mentorship has decayed to the point where, yeah, there's people in their young 20s who don't know how to charge for their work because no one's taught us how to charge for our work, because we didn't all have an older, more experienced editor say, hey, all right, you've been doing this about 3 years, you're worth roughly this, because everything's going to be a moving target.
I can definitely speak to that because
Yeah.
I have only ever wanted a mentor. You know, like I've only ever sought something like that, because I know that there's things I need to know and I don't know them. You know, like
And
it's
who do you ask?
I have to ask, and who do I ask, and who do I want to like
Where are those mentors?
yeah, where are they? I mean, I've found, you know, some for different parts of things I've gone through in my career so far, but you're right. I mean, where are those mentors? Because we need them. We're not told the real world things in school. We're not told a lot of the real world things in school. So.
And the mentor, and one of the reasons it's important to have a mentor guiding you is they know you and your work. As a working artist, what we do is weird because some of us are more technical, some of us are technical and artists, but most of us will be viewed as working artists, even if your job is super technical, even if it involves engineering, even if unless you're actually an engineer. If you're working in post and you're the editor, and you work at a place where you're the editor and your own assist and the engineer and your Foley person, we've all had those jobs, but you will be treated like an artist, and there's this devaluation of art and knowledge and the soft skills that you bring to that people just want tasks accomplished. They just want these cards offloaded. So some of those tasks have an inherent value, but then, you know, if you're gonna offload all the cards and put them in a better file structure than the other person who's competing for that job, how do you sell that soft skill? How do you sell your experience at any age?
So we are probably, what I like about this, we're leading towards a discussion of soft skills and hard skills as well. I would like to take one question. I haven't been texting myself, I've been paying attention. But here's a question which I think is really quite germane to what we're talking about here. Can you define younger? What about people in their 30s? Which group are they in? Which I think to some degree is a question about when do you get tired of the unsustainable model? When do you get tired of being like, yeah, I'll work for free, or yeah, I'll work for less, or yeah, you had hinted about, and you have others, demands outside, but what is younger? So for me, anybody younger than my age is younger, but that may not be what we're talking about here. So what is younger and when does that stop?
It varies.
Yeah.
You always have to ask. I'm in any conversation, I'm big on what is called common definitions, where we all agree at the beginning of a conversation. So usually when I'm in a situation where I need to know, and might be, you know, I try to figure out what that person's parameters are.
So let's ask that question here. What are we talking about when we say ageism on the younger side? What do we mean?
I mean, most like inexperienced or lack of experience. I guess, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the main one for me, at least.
Yeah, when I say younger, I usually mean like fresh out of college. You don't have a huge job support network yet. And I also try to be precise with my language and say, because you can be green, meaning you're 45 and you recently moved from production and you're now offloading daily, so you're green at that, but you've got 20 years of really awesome job experience in production. So you got skills, you got experience, you're green at this task. So people take advantage of those people too, which isn't,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's definitely a difference between greenism, if you will, and ageism.
You heard it here first.
that might be,
Yeah.
how green you are might be a
Hashtag
fair
greenism.
judgment, but,
Yeah.
but then
We're
there's
setting
these
up-
perceptions.
Yeah, we're setting up an Instagram right now. But yeah, so I completely agree, because I think that there definitely is a difference between being green, being young, because I've met some very scorned 23-year-olds who are just over it like already, and who've seen it all, and they like put their foot down about like what they're worth, and sometimes it works out.
Did they have good mentors?
What?
Is there a pattern there? Do they have mentorship? I'm just curious.
Yes.
It's like, yeah,
Yes.
I find there's a correlation there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's, from my own experience, it's sort of like you get to a point where it's like before that point, you need experience, and you, like, in order to just survive, in order to pay for your life and for your, you know, 3 or 6-figure student loans, and like the cost of living in Los Angeles in 2016. You know, like, you have to do whatever it takes to get that experience if you want a future for yourself, if you want a sustainable financial future for yourself. as a young person in this industry. So in that case, you're kind of willing to do kind of anything you have to do in order to get that experience, no matter what the cost at the time, because that experience is priceless. So there kind of comes a point where you like are just like, okay, I have enough experience, I'm like getting this job, I'm going in for this interview, I'm gonna get this job that actually pays a decent amount of money. So at that point, you can kind of start telling people what you want instead of begging for what you need. And also at that point, it's sort of what you were talking about earlier, at that point where it's like you need that experience, it's very easy to get taken advantage of by these pockets of post-production that are mismanaged. But yeah, and then when you're green, the good thing about being older and being green, like you said, is that at least at that point, you kind of have the knowledge of what you're worth, and you have that experience of like standing up for what your needs are, negotiating for your rate, like, because those are very important skills that you just don't have when you're young, because you don't have them until you go through them, those experiences.
And recognizing when you're in that situation where you need to negotiate. Yeah.
Exactly.
And not being afraid.
Yeah, it's an
to negotiate.
opportunity, so, you know, yeah. I've more recently experienced that. Like, I feel like I'm transitioning into that time where I'm like, oh, okay, so I can actually negotiate, and I should negotiate and have the conversation.
So there are two things that come out of this I think are interesting. And someone actually on the chat says, doesn't a certain amount of wisdom come with age regardless of actual experience in the field? So not quite sure how to answer that, but let me throw that out, because clearly one of the things you're talking about is getting enough experience to manage aspects of your career. So why don't we talk a little bit about that in a world in which the amount of media that's being created is exploding, but the amount of money that people are being paid on any individual project is actually contracting largely. For people who are experienced enough to know what they're worth, what happens when they can't get that? Or how do you handle something like that? I mean, that's ageism on the old side.
Yeah, that's kind of tough, because from my experience, I've noticed people who are older in this industry, who have been working in this industry for decades, and still have the problem that younger people have in this industry, where they never had a mentor, they never really learned how to like put their foot down in terms of actually knowing what they're worth, because their whole lives in this industry they've been told that, you know, you're worth this amount, when like if they went somewhere else that did something else, then like they would realize that like, oh, what have I been doing? So unfortunately, I think generally with age and wisdom comes the ability to manage your career and negotiate, but it's not universal, which is sad, because a lot of people are in this industry who are veterans, who are amazing at what they do, and who kind of get trapped in this cycle of going through jobs that will kind of just be like, all right, well, we need this person, and we have this amount of money, and kind of just give them you know, really low rate to do what they're doing for a lower cost, without, you know, really allowing them to negotiate for what they really need, which is frustrating, because it's like, these people are amazing, like, what are you doing? But yeah, so like that's really difficult to see sometimes, because like these are people that you look up to and who you kind of see yourself in as a younger person, so it's hard to see those people getting taken advantage of even at their age. There are people, thankfully a lot of people in this industry who are older know how to do those skills and know how to negotiate and things like that, but lack of mentorship I think is something that affects all age groups in this industry.
Right. And that's really hard to teach, by the way, for those of you who've gone through film school or something. How do you teach negotiating skills? We can do that, but how do you?
just as far as valuing our work too. Unfortunately, like in a free market, it's kind of on you as a freelancer, as a working artist, to make your own value proposition. You have to make the case for why you're worth that money, you know. And unfortunately for us, the nature of how our gigs is structured, you have to do that several times a year. You have to do it for your whole life.
So you think you'd get good at it after a while?
You think you'd get good at it. Unfortunately, you can't control how it's being received, and unfortunately well, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but it's just a fact of life. The way our economy is structured is things change in value. You know, the perception of the value of your work changes. You know, they used to pay people in, you know, reality TV, those editors used to make tons of money. Then suddenly story producers started to be a thing, like who went on set. So there was less of that story producing happening in the edit, and more of it was happening on set. So, you know, the rates went down because you're not a predator. You know, you're not producing the story as you're editing. At a few shows, those jobs persist, but most of the new shows, you know, we all know that people consider reality to be really low rates. There was a time when it used to be considered very high rates. So everything is always a moving target. And fortunately for myself, I had a lot of people telling me from a very young age, you know, if you're going to be a working artist, that's something you're going to always have to deal with. You have to prove your own value. You always have to be top of your game. So there's like a lot of pressure on you as an employee to sell yourself all the time as a freelancer. And so I had always heard this, but apparently the study only came out 2 years ago, but I'm not sure if it's building off something else, because I remember being given this advice once too, which was someone told me in my early 20s, you know, when I was trying to price out the cost of going to college versus what I'm gonna make versus, you know, is this a good life plan? Am I gonna make enough money doing this thing to justify, you know, art school, getting a fine arts degree?
No.
The answer is no. Yeah, everyone was like, don't do that, don't do that.
You do it for other reasons.
Maybe stay a computer science major.
No, but it's okay.
Maybe double major, I don't know. But someone did tell me once, you know, you're going to make the bulk of your lifetime salary by the time you're 40. And the Fed came out with a study 2 years ago, last year. Did you read the study also? I was reading it last week. By read, I mean skim. But they basically validated that statistic, that most people reach their peak lifetime earnings by the time they're 40. Now, if you're in a traditional job where you're going to stay in that job for 50, 60 years, which no one has a traditional job anymore, but especially for those of us who intend to be freelance and intend to have several jobs a year and maybe a second career at some point in our lifetime, that's something to think about. You reach your peak earnings by the time you're 40. And there was another study done in relation to that to see that was about ageism in the workplace and to see how it affected your hiring and your salaries past the age of 35. And what that study found, and again, I'm so sorry, you're going to have to Google these statistics for yourself because I didn't cite anything. But what they found was that right away at 35, employers started valuing you less as a worker. So that's a little scary, and that's something to think about when you're 16, 17 years old and you're figuring out how much you're going to spend on college and how much could you earn over a lifetime. Like that's terrifying, and I have no happy ending to that statistic. I just wanted to put that out there. But I do think these are things that people should be taught, like in high school, you know? They should give us accounting skills. They should give us life budgeting skills. No one gives us that. So, you know, we just get thrown out into the workforce, and then eventually we're 35 and we're 40 and we reach that place and we're like, oh no.
Definitely.
So what can we all do, you know?
Wow,
And
so how do you follow that one up, Yolanda?
yeah, follow that up with something cheerful, please.
Well, I was gonna say it's more than just that. I mean, I'm 23, and I think that there's more about the 20s that we're not really talking about right now. We're talking a lot about like how much we're earning and how much we're worth, but there's a lot more like personally as a 20-something that we go through with figuring out ourselves and what our passions really are, and defining our skills for ourselves so that we can walk into the room and say who we are and what we can offer, because like we're young and we're still figuring that out, but we have to say what we can do and sell ourselves. So, but there's a lot more that we have to figure out, I think, more than just stuff we should be learning about, you know, asking, negotiating for salaries, but like there's a lot more personally we have to figure out, I think.
So
it's important.
The most successful people who I know on the older side of the age spectrum are the ones who have been able to continue to sell themselves differently as their career goes on. So we used to be able to just sit in our rooms by ourselves, make splices, straight cuts, and move on. Now we're continually out there rebranding ourselves, selling ourselves. We're doing color correction, we're doing visual effects, we're doing sound, we're doing all of that stuff. And those people are actually doing quite well still. They've long since exceeded the 40-year-old age, but are also making far more money than they ever did. So it has something to do, I think, with the reinvention concept and people who want to change, people who don't. I want to get back to the idea of the mentor, though, because choosing the right mentor, I think, is important, and how you find them. So are there people in each one of your fields who you would be able to look and identify as, you know what, if I have your career in another 15, 20 years, I'm going to be happy?
I think it's possible to see those people, but it can't really speak to having access to those kinds of people in terms of direct communication and asking them for like the skills that you need to get where they are, because it's really hard to get those kinds of mentors into young people's lives early, especially in academia. It's hard to like yank those people out of the spheres that they're in and the careers that they have, because those careers are very time consuming. So it's hard to get those kinds of mentors and those editors out of what they're doing and bring them into an environment with young people where they can give them their advice.
But at this stage in your life, right now, where you're no longer in school, can you identify someone who you might be able to find how to approach and approach them as a mentor? Is that possible?
I think so. I think that I come from a place of immense privilege, so I've been able to work my way up to get to the job that I have at this point, because I've been given resources early on that have allowed me to like work as hard as I do to like get to where I am. So yeah, personally, I think that I have access to like those people. I almost said pizzas. I'm a little hungry, sorry. But yeah, no,
Good
like
pizza is sometimes better
yeah,
than people.
good pizza feeds the soul. But yeah, no, I think I do have access to those people, which I'm really grateful for actually, because they're receptive enough to a young person coming to them and asking them for advice, where they would respond and we would have a dialogue.
So you could
yeah.
identify, find, and hopefully begin working, albeit informally, with a mentor. So what about you?
Do I currently have mentors? Yes.
Can you identify people who could be mentors for where you'd like to be in 15, 20 years?
Yeah, there's two people, there's two different editors right now who I do not know in real life, but I would hope to meet them someday, sometime, and maybe they'll spend 20 minutes chatting with me for coffee. I will say this though, the way I've found most of my mentors in the past, and even if someone doesn't become an actual mentor where they're spending active time with you, role models are important too. If you could just glean something by being in someone's room, at work. I've tried to pick one person at every job I've ever had and be their shadow in my free time.
So a series of mentors
I've had a
who are
series.
accessible because they're where you work.
Yeah, they might not think of themselves as a mentor to you, because mentor actually means something super specific where you've both like entered into this agreement that you're going to have, a teaching and learning relationship. So maybe it's way more informal and you look up to someone as a mentor. But yeah, I've tried at every single job I've had to learn to pick one person. I never like to be the smartest person in the room. If I feel like I'm the smartest person in the room, I get bored
Time to move
right
on.
away. Yeah, and it's time to move on. You've outgrown that job. Or, more importantly, if you feel like you're the smartest person in the room, you find someone and you teach them something is actually the thing to do, because you mentioned this before. You're used to being the youngest person. I'm in my early 30s, so I've only recently, in the past few years, started accepting that I'm a full-grown adult. and I'm no longer the youngest person in the room. I still feel like it and act like it, and I kind of forget how old I am. But at some point, you reach what Katie Hinson calls the sweet spot, age-wise, and you still like feel young. You still feel like you're in a learning position, which is cool. You should keep that attitude forever.
I think forever.
Forever, be a lifelong learner. But then at some point, you realize you might actually have stuff that you can teach people. But I think that's really important too, and that's one way, since we were eventually going to get to talking about solutions, that's one way I think that all of us can focus, our mindfulness on at work is, every week learn a new thing, every week teach a new thing.
So that is great and exactly addresses what I'm hoping to move to is, we don't get mentored if we're not proactive about these things. And many of us are just, I'm so overwhelmed with how much work I have to do that it's hard to identify mentors and seek them out and work with them, albeit informally, as we say. But I know of nobody in this business who will not respond to someone saying, can I buy you coffee for 15 minutes and ask you a few questions? Nobody, zero, that includes Academy Award winners as well. So identifying who they are in a realistic way, and by the way, every 3 years, maybe re-identifying them and moving on, is extremely helpful in terms of finding what's severely lacking nowadays in our isolated industry, which is mentorship. Now, you were at SCAD. SCAD has some amazing teachers.
Yes.
But it is in Savannah, which is not the center of the known production and post-production universe. So how did you find your mentors there? How did you choose to move out here, and how do you continue to find mentors?
I had a lot of great professors that I would definitely go to today if I had any questions, but I have found that since moving to LA, the thing that actually works is networking and getting out there. And choosing a mentor, I never thought of choosing a mentor actually. I thought, well, something will click, right? Because when you meet somebody, you don't know them, you're getting to know them, especially when you're cold networking and you're like, okay, I don't know this person, but I'm gonna ask them to coffee and take the leap and see what happens, see if we click. And I guess for me, I've always thought that a mentor is gonna be somebody that I click with and I know I can, talk to about my career. So for me, it's been networking, and I've actually found a couple of people that I have felt I can email when I need to understand, okay, well, what should I be getting paid in this position? And luckily, I've been able to do that. But I met those people because I just happened to go to an event, and I just went by myself and said, hi, I'm Elin. And it's scary, but that worked, and I still, email that person, and she actually wants to help me, and it can happen that way and that easily just by networking. And
Well, I want to correct something you said. You didn't happen to go to an event.
Okay, sorry.
You chose to
I
go to
did
the
choose.
event?
I chose to go to the event alone, and I chose proactive, and I put myself out there because that's what I knew I needed to do. But again, a mentor for me, it needs to click, and it's not like you force it anything. It's mutual.
Right, that's why I said a mentorship is very specific, but if you can, and somewhat rare. So even if you can just make friends and have role models, and that's fine too. Don't get hung up on.
That's true.
Do what you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm going to define mentorship to include all of that.
Okay.
It's just someone who you might like to be a mentor, or someone who you've got one thing to learn from, or whatever. Reach out to that. And so long as we're moving towards you here, there's actually a question I want to throw in, which is specifically for you from our YouTube chat, right? So, you?
Twitter knows your name.
And maybe you could discuss this also in terms of how you solve this issue. So have you had any difficulty negotiating rates because of your age? And let's add into that, if you have, how have you resolved those issues? How do you get advice on those things? What are the ways that you can make yourself more comfortable talking about those things?
Yeah, I've had problems negotiating rate because of my age. And both because of my age and because I was green at the time, like I've had problems in the past with negotiating rate where,
What
like
kind
I
of problem do
knew,
you mean?
well, for example, like with a job I had in the past, I was negotiating with a supervisor about, like I was moving up to a position and I was negotiating with them about my rate, and I knew how much that position usually offers in that industry because I did my homework. But when I threw that number out, then they were, not really receptive to that. So it got like undercut by like a little bit. Not like a horrible amount, but like it was still that I could notice that it was there, that it was because of my age. I wasn't going to be offered the standard rate for this position in this industry.
How did you find out the standard rate?
Just because I have other friends in this industry that I went to film school with who were doing the same thing. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like it was a very realistic number for compensation for this job, but I wasn't going to get it because I was still new. Even though I knew I was up to the position, not just that I knew I was up to the position, but I knew I was up to the task of training for that position and up to the task for learning more about the position and molding myself into that position at an earlier age. So that was kind of difficult just because, it's like, what do you do in that situation? You don't really have a chance to, like, have a choice to say, like just keep going back and forth about, like, this much, like, negotiating is such a hard thing to go into when you're young because you haven't really done it that often, and also it's sort of this battle of language, if you will. So that's something that's really hard to deal with when you're young because you don't really know, like you haven't really tried enough as to like, oh, like this works in terms of edging up to this amount or like, suggesting this or blah, 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 like you don't really know those things.
Or even feeling
Doesn't
valuable.
get easier.
Yeah,
Doesn't get
exactly.
easier.
Yeah.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Or even feeling valuable because pretty much every job listing is always like rate depends on experience.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? The subtext there is that there's no inherent value to the work being done, to the task. Like there's no inherent value in loading your dailies. I mean, that's fine, but there is an inherent value in a task, and that's the minimum wage of that task. That's what scale is. When the union sets scale, that's the minimum value for doing that job description.
And that's what it's called. It's called the minimum scale, or it's called the minimum amounts, the weekly amounts.
Right, and then if you have more experience and are like super elite at doing that task, you get paid more based on your experience. But for some reason, like you're describing, it tends to work out for people freshly out of college or people who are green. The depends on experience tends to work out as we want to pay you half of minimum wage for this task, which is interesting because they're devaluing the task. As, but they're trying to put it on you. And when you're young, you don't have the confidence to say, no, well, first of all, everything is so opaque. We don't know what the inherent value of any of these tasks are in a non-union gig because they're out as the employer is always, well, it's not union, so.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, but.
Is there no way of discovering what's out there?
Crowdsourcing the answer. Usually I post on Facebook. I mean, I see so many Facebook and Twitter requests, hey guys, I have to do this work, how would you value this? PM me, because no one's ever comfortable talking about money publicly, which is fair, but that's taboo that's taboo in our society, and it's one of the things, like that's the point of organizing a union, is talking about what you all decide is the common value. So for those of us outside of the union and doing this work, it's really complicated to set a rate.
So to some degree, this is what many of us have or had agents to do, not just the negotiation part, because it sucks to negotiate for money, that's true, but to have knowledge to know what going rates are, because they're doing more than just my negotiation. They know that. And one thing I hear, you said was crowdsourcing doesn't exactly take the place of the agent, but can provide some of that information.
Yeah, because to negotiate effectively, you need knowledge about what the rates are. You need the confidence to say, no, I am worth this, and to not be scared that crap, if I stand, you know, tall on this one and really demand my rate and then I don't get the gig, well, I'm gonna be unemployed for 3 weeks. So you need a lot of things, you know, you need your financial safety cushion and the confidence to really go for it, but you just need the knowledge of what to ask for too.
So let me flip something else in here, because I've heard this and I've heard people talk about this from the older people side of things, for people who have this color hair. We hear, well, you know, I could get a kid, quote unquote, to do this for X over 2 amount of dollars rather than what you're asking. So whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but that there is an amount of pitting one group against another, which to some degree I think promotes ageism. And is a great tactic if you're trying to pay as little as possible. So some of this has to do, I think, with banding together, with exchange of information, and being realistic about things. You mentioned crowdsourcing. How do you, when you came to negotiate your dollar, and I don't mean to dwell only on that, because the dollar amount, because there is also a very large aspect of quality of life, and how you, some of the minimum basic agreement stuff has to do with how many hours you can work and all of that. So how do you kind of, at this stage, very, very early in your career, negotiate that?
That's hard because when I've learned about anything about negotiating, I know that a strategy is, oh, I've been paid this range before, so, but I'm negotiable. And the thing is, I'm so young and I don't have all the experience and I've never had certain positions, so I don't really have, in my mind, I'm not thinking, oh, I've been paid this range before. I'm approaching it as if this is the range I know, because I've asked or something. But the strategy is not coming from experience that I've had. It's coming from what I know, and that's how I approach it. So.
Well, how could you know everything?
Yeah,
right?
no.
There's simply no way. That's what mentors are for, whether the mentor is a literal mentor, whether it's
Yeah.
someone who's saying, that amount's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Or that request is ridiculous. That schedule is absurd. That whatever, that kind of mentorship. So I guess what I'm trying to push through here is to try and figure out how you get mentors that are of value to you. So you mentioned some at school that you can still call today.
Yes. I mean, and then of course people that I've met here that luckily I've lucked out in like fostering a relationship with some of those people, and I know and I have emailed them with questions. And it's hard because you really do, I mean, you kind of have to pick and choose because it's not easy to open up about, you know, like how much you're getting paid and how much you should be getting paid because, I mean, as a young person in this industry, I'm like, I want to work. Like, what can I do and how much can I get paid now? Because that's what I just want to start somewhere. But I think my tactic has always been to ask questions, to find people I do trust what they say, and hope that with the knowledge comes confidence. I'm more confident going into something because I have done my research and done it the best I can, knowing still I've never done this before, you know? So it does help to ask. I mean, even though it's kind of scary to ask too at the same time, it's probably the best thing to do. Yeah.
So some of the viewers on our YouTube chat right now, I'm sure are not here in Los Angeles. You're all fortunate in that you're working in a place where there's a large group of people in the media industry who you can, should you choose to go out and ask questions of. What about for people who don't live in one of the major cities? Can they do the same thing? And if so, how? Give some advice, oh wise mentor.
Well, for all of you out there, it's much harder because I found that in my experience with working in Los Angeles, it's to find mentors and role models and like things like what you were saying, like the little like role models along the way. A lot of that comes with just being open with what your concerns are with your coworkers, because from my experience, once you kind of breach the surface of the topic you're concerned about with the people who are in there with it with you, then they're usually very receptive to talking to you about it and kind of guiding you through it and things like that, which is great. But what do you do if you're not in that situation, if you don't have a job yet, or if you're still in school, or if you're just working in film and moving images like you said, but just not in Hollywood or New York or places like that? In those cases, I mean, thank God for the internet, because you can Google anything at this point, and forums. I'm sure, I haven't personally done this, but I'm sure there must be like post-production forums and things like that out there where you can get that same group of people together just in an online space instead of a workspace.
You can ask any question on the Blue Collar Post Collective Facebook group, for example.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I have seen a lot of people do that, and that's it's a good way to get at everyone right here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Basically, just seek out any resource you can in your current situation. You can never do too much homework, you can never do too much research. And the internet is a terrifyingly endless void of information that can be
wealth of
helpful
access.
sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I would say definitely utilize the resources you have and seek out resources you don't. Because there might be a networking event or something in your area that you might not know about. You never know until you look. And it's just being proactive, like everyone keeps saying, like it's so important to be proactive, especially if you're early in your career. Like you have to go to those networking events because you never know what will come out of them. And because it's never been so terrifyingly easy to be lazy nowadays. Like it's so easy to be like, oh, like I Googled a few things, like I've done everything, like I can. And that's not necessarily true.
So
like,
it is true what they say about millennials then, huh?
It's really good. Well, I wouldn't say it's true of our behavior, but I think our circumstances enable us to be lazy.
I just thought I'd throw in
Yeah.
an ageist
No, totally.
comment.
Yeah.
I think that's really great, the idea of use all your resources, and I will say this too, you have more resources than you think you do. Everything is a resource. Everything. I got my very first gig in post-production when I was 15 because of a babysitting job. Like I asked the people I babysit for, can I come intern for you this summer? And that is how I got my internship. So like everything is a resource, you know. I might never have noticed that one of 4 or 5 families that I babysat for, the 2 of them happened to be editors. Everything is a resource no matter where you live. Like, yeah, there are, you have the internet, so you can ask anyone a question on the internet from anywhere in the world. You can go to your local news station and visit the editors there. You can go to, like, every city has a local news station. You might have to drive for an hour, but you have access to these things. You can create access for yourself cheaply. I know like college, film school is really expensive. If you can't go to film school, be an accountant. And I'm not kidding, because like that's a really great life skill, because when you're freelance and you need to do your books, or when you're freelance and you need to pick up some work, I went through film school, I worked for 6 years, like about 20, 30 weeks a year doing something that had nothing to do with television, nothing at all, but it paid my bills. And for the other 20 weeks a year, I got to work on indie films that paid me $0. Most of which I brought, my own meals to as I was editing, these awesome little art films, but that was paying me no money. So,
So I think that we've moved sort of talking about ageism to just talking about how not to be stupid about looking for work.
Yeah,
And I think that's
pretty
really
much.
good because that circles back to one of the earlier things we talked about, is people who don't change are the ones who kind of don't get the gigs. So there are new ways of getting gigs now today. There are new ways of familiarizing yourself with people and having them get familiar with you. I'll say this, that at least in my experience, the number of people who get jobs by sending out resumes cold to places that don't know them and they don't know where. It's close to 0%, if not fully 0%. But the ones who send out resumes and make some personal contact are much, much more successful. So you mentioned Blue Collar Pulse Collective. There's a tremendous number of resources online where you can find out who somebody's assistant editor was. That's
Wait,
often
really?
more valuable.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, shocking.
That's a little scary.
Shocking. And that you discover that may be the person who you want to contact for some career coffee advice or career advice, period. Not the editor, but the assistant editor. So be appropriate, be smart, but that also don't be lazy about it.
Yeah, and going off of that, I think courage has a lot to do with it, because I think in terms of putting yourself out there, like doing these networking things, like meeting new people, sending in resumes with personal contact, a lot of that has to do with overcoming fear. And I think a big collective opponent of like everyone who's in this industry is fear of just like, oh, like, I don't know if I want to go because, like, maybe I'll be, like, I'll look stupid or, like, blah, 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 you know, like, there's always going to be that voice in the back of your head, and I know it's going to be in the back of your head because it's in the back of my head all the time.
Everyone's afraid,
Like,
so
yeah,
just don't worry
everyone,
about it.
yeah, no, everyone is just as afraid as you are, so, you know, like, that's why a lot of people will be, if you just take the jump to, like, go talk to that person or do that networking event or something like that, people will welcome you because people know what it's like to be in that position. And, you know, a lot of people out there want to help you in this industry and want to mentor you and want to help advance your career, but it's not gonna happen unless you overcome that voice in your head and actually do those things, because that is so important. Like, it's so hard to do it, but you just gotta look in the mirror and be like, water off a duck's back and just freaking go do it, you know?
Yeah, one thing I've learned recently is there's strength in weak ties, and it's scary, like you said, but you actually will learn more from people you don't know, because you're striking a conversation with them, and there's a different dialogue going on, and you may learn something, and you may find a mentor out of it, or, you know, you never know. So it's always, I mean, don't be led by fear. That's one thing I learned recently.
So an assignment that an agent who I was interviewing to potentially be an agent gave me, which I think is very helpful for you all as well, is to say, the agent said, let's imagine that I say so-and-so is doing a movie. He's going to direct a film, and they're producing, someone is producing with them, and here are two names. Go back home and come up with a list of everybody who you could contact who might help you get to these people. And obviously, he was testing to see kind of what my network was. But the other thing he was testing was to see how I thought about looking to use that network. And my guess is if you did that same thing, if you went out and just imagined that there was someone that, a TV program or a news program, depending on what you want to do, who was going to be hiring an editor or assistant editor, how would you get to that person? And you try to figure it out, you would find the dentist who you may know someone, someone who you babysat with. Think more broadly about all of this and then reach out to them. They won't have that job because this was just an exercise in your head, but they might have one in X number of months or years. So do that research now and reach out to those people now. And one other bit of advice, I'll put my dad hat on right now. Maybe this is my professor hat. One other piece of advice that I would give is you go out on what are called informational interviews. You're not looking for a job from the person who you're going for. Because if they don't have a job, they'll never meet you in the first place. Nope, don't really care to meet you because I don't have a job to give you. But if you go to them and go, God, I really like where you are in your career. Can I just buy you coffee 15 minutes and find out kind of how you got there and what you did and what those paths were? And let's just talk for a while. Almost no one says no to giving advice. It may take 6 months before you can actually connect and do that, but you'll be nice about it, I promise. And then meet them. And then before you leave, tell them how great that was and ask them for 2 more names. The people you can continue to do that with. So you see how the math works there? So if you set your proper goals, you're going to be able to really increase that group of people around you. So that's, I'll take my dad hat off now and read, speaking of fears, let me move into perhaps the question that could kill all questions.
Oh, man.
From YouTube. And I think maybe this person was referring to older people here. A lot of older people are saying the sky is falling for post-production pros. AI, democratization, low cost equals downfall. By the way, as an older person, no, I don't say that at all, but what's the future of post? Is it really this dire?
I think I know exactly what this person is referring to, and I will say this again. I'm not an economist. I went to art school, but
You know about accounting.
But I do know some things, and so like every few decades, the economy changes. You know, like we have inflation, things devalue, things revalue, things like reposition, and da 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 da. So you know, you might have noticed since the market crashed in 2008, like the sky is falling pretty much everywhere. I don't think this is unique to Post. I think a lot of industries are contracting right now, and things are, you know, being revalued. People got laid off. There's fewer jobs in general in most industries now, and those jobs tend to pay less. Jobs that were paying the old rate of like 8-10 years ago. I believe this is the layout that person is referring to, or rather what they're referring to.
Well, the automation part, I think, is...
Yeah, like for example, you know, like a brief, small example is like, you know, is pretty much immediately in the fall of 2008, between the fall of 2008, winter 2009, all of the small businesses in Manhattan that were, all of the production companies that were small businesses folded, because when the banks froze the bridge loans, small businesses couldn't get funding to pay their freelancers, all the shops closed up, so there was actually less work. We're still recovering from that as a country. And specifically for us as post-professionals, you know, what does it mean for us? Well, like every other job industry, you know, there's just fewer jobs, they pay less, things are in a state of flux. That's gonna happen your entire life, always. So if that scares you, maybe take a job with less volatility in it. And I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I mean, like that's gonna happen every few decades, and yeah, it is scary and it's real. So like it is changing. For some people, the sky is falling. They might need to rethink their business model, and that's really a rough thing for them to go through. Coping with change is rough. It doesn't mean that as a young person you should not consider this as a career. It's just one more thing to understand about the job that you are going to have for the rest of your life, and that you might at some point have to deal with that. And so whatever that means to you, to have a backup plan. You know, like maybe you get that accounting degree, so if this whole editing thing doesn't work out, you can always get a job as an accountant. And I'm kind of not joking about that.
Stop with the accounting thing, it's making me nervous.
You know, I mean, that's a real life example. I do know a lot of people who work in television who went to college, they got degrees in other things. I'm thinking of this one guy in specific who's been extremely successful, and he majored in accounting. But he ended up being a gaffer, and he owns his own light shop, and he's a tremendously successful dude. And you know, I had like a chat with him one time about that. You know, and he got into the whole TV game because his roommate in college was a film major, and he was the accounting major, and now he owns like a really big light shop that like, you know, he lights major features. So
Is the sky falling?
When isn't it? I think is a better question. No, seriously, I think a lot of this has to do with flexibility and your own, because there's a difference between flexibility and plasticity. I believe that plasticity is something that is precious that you have when you're young, that you need to utilize in order to future-proof your livelihood, basically.
Yeah.
Flexibility, I think, is like the ability of like when you're older, you kind of just take a look at your skills and you're just like, okay, how can I kind of like model this into like something that can like, keep paying my bills for the next 10 years. And I think both of those things are very important to take advantage of because those are really important skills to have in order to not end up in that position where it's just like, oh, what I've been doing for the past 20 years is now like obsolete and I can't do anything else. Because you don't want, like you want to end up in any position other than that, basically. So yeah, I think that while, like if you're a young person in post-production, take this time to learn everything you can about post and just how post works so you can kind of anticipate the changes that are happening in post and adjust your career accordingly because you like this isn't an industry where you're going to be doing the same job for your whole life. Like you can train to be an editor and like train yourself to be an editor and like have a lifelong passion for editing and do it like in some form or another your whole life, but it's not the craft that you're going to be doing your entire career. Like you're going to be doing other things. I mean, like I love editing. I've been editing music videos since I was like 19 and like it's really my passion, but I'm a data I/O technician because I'm good with tech. Like I understand the way that code works and I know that I can do it quickly and accurately. So you kind of have to look at your skills in that lens in order to really be like, okay, these are the jobs that I can get with these skills, and here are the jobs that I can kind of coax myself into doing, into like training myself into doing. And then that way you'll never really run out of jobs to do because you'll be able to at least understand how each of them work, which is super important.
Right. So let me amplify some of the things you said there. I'm fortunate enough to be working at a school that's heavily invested in emerging technologies. And some of the older professors there are just as into VR, AR, 360 stuff as sometimes more so than our students. I think that if you want to be an editor, that's great. If you want to be an editor on feature films released by studios, then that's really sick because you're investing your energy in what probably, if not definitely, is a dying industry. But if you're looking to pick up skills, you can move from one place to another. It's not the studio part, it's the artistry part. Flexibility, I think, is most important. So if you take a look at what people like Chris Milk are doing right now as they explore the intersection of technology and art, all of his editors code as well, right? So it's not separate anymore. So the ability to be flexible, I think exactly what you said, is so important no matter what age you're at.
Yeah, and those things will make you a better editor.
Yes.
Like those things will make you, those skills that you are flexible enough or plastic enough to absorb and like integrate into your skill set, those things will make you better at what you ultimately want to do. So even for the time being, if you're just like, oh, I gotta take like this job in order to like make money, blah, 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 those things, if not the skills you learn at that job, but the life experience you go through doing that job, those things will make you better at what you want to do.
There's a great quote that John Landgraf, who heads, FX TV, says, there's too much TV now, too much TV. And I go, no, there's not. There's too much TV for you, but not necessarily too much TV for the 500 editors or the 1,500 editors who'll be working on all of those scripted shows, and the 1,000 editors who'll be working in various phases of the nonfiction side of things, and the people who are doing all the ancillary, people who do like what you do at Common. That job sort of didn't exist 20 years ago. So I think it's actually one of the best times to get involved in post-production. There's more stuff being made, albeit at lower price points.
Most of it, yes.
The last 4 jobs I've had, 3 of them, I haven't been in the same city as the director or producer. So worldwide, there's much more stuff. We can do that now, never could before. So it's, in my opinion, the sky is not falling. It's the ground that's swelling and that you really need to kind of jump in that. And I'm the Pollyanna here, so, but I think there's so much there if you're flexible.
I agree with that. Just because the terrain is changing, it doesn't mean that, you know, there's not a place for you there.
That's right.
Find a place.
Change with the terrain.
Yeah, I totally agree with that the ground is swelling because, yeah, it's like what you said, like even though things are changing, there's more scripted and unscripted content shows, whatever you wanna call it, videos that are being made now than ever before in history. Like people are saying that we're entering like a second golden age of television, so, you know, even though there's a lot of problems that we can overcome as a group, like don't be discouraged from coming to this industry because there are plenty of opportunities for everyone.
With all apologies to the camera department, you know, there's data I/O wranglers now. They're you know, the job of film loader has gone away, but the job of data I/O wrangler was created. So there's definitely opportunities for work
Yeah, absolutely.
for decades.
So, so we talked mentorship, we've talked changing landscape here, and I'm sort of interested in if there are things that you find you can't learn from, we talked about negotiation. I think politics is another part about how to kind of operate in a room where different people may want different things. But are there some skills that you can't learn without other people? It's a double negative, isn't it? And so let me rephrase that question. There's certainly skills that you can pick up online through courses and things like that. There's certainly skills that you can develop and learn by yourself by being smart and proactive. What are the skills that you feel you cannot gain and learn without reaching out to other people?
I think communication is a big thing, because especially in post-production, there's a really specific way that the chain of command communicates with one another when you're working that you can only really learn on the job. And that's even really hard to teach someone one-on-one in a mentor relationship because you kind of have to learn those skills from doing the job, from learning, you know, how to properly like phrase your emails to be as clear as possible, how to, you know, who to reach out to in like situations where you need something or things like that. Like those are, that kind of communication you can only really learn on the job in post-production. So yeah, I think that's the main thing, just because there's like skills you can learn like in terms of like your craft, like you can perfect that on your own or doing whatever, but like, and the other thing with communication is it's so specific to like whatever job you take, because like there's communication that's specific to the chain of command in I/O, in television, in scripted television. Like that is very different from the chain of command for like if you're an assistant editor in reality television. Like it's so different, but like they're different beasts but in the same family sort of. So you know, it's kind of hard to like learn those methods of communication, but again, the biggest thing is flexibility. So like the biggest thing is just to learn how to communicate in like whatever job you're doing and like advance yourself to like wherever environment you see yourself in being and what your goal is in terms of like what job you want. And like going into that environment and kind of like molding yourself to how they communicate so that you can, you know, easily communicate yourself and like without any bumps or anything in the road in terms of how you get things done and who you hand those things off to and like who QCs those things and like all that. So, yeah.
And want to echo what you said about hierarchy. Communication is huge. A well-crafted email is an art. But also, yeah, how to exist and work within a hierarchy, or what I like to call how to know your place, which a lot of people at first, I say that and people go, ugh. But I don't mean in the negative way. I mean how to work. I had a film professor who excellently described working in film and TV like this. It's like working in a military run by circus people. We're really into hierarchy, we're really into being communicated to and with in a specific sort of way for efficiency and use. But just like the art of being in a room, and for us it's an edit room. You know, the whole thing of like, you know, be seen, not heard, don't give a note, how to never give a note when you're an assistant, like little things like that. Yeah, how to exist in a hierarchy, so etiquette. I always call it know your place because I was raised as a ballerina, so that's like, you know, we're super into hierarchy and rules.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about experience, just getting the experience that you can't get out of just being online and talking or reading and self-teaching. I think that it's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, communicating, negotiating, politics, like you said. I mean, there's just so much. I mean, yeah, it's just best to go out and experience things and hope that you get the opportunity to experience those things so that you can have that in your tool, belt.
So I'm going to add one thing to that, and then I have a specific question for you. So what I'll add is before you learn that stuff, you need to learn who to learn from. So I would absolutely, once again, if you can identify the people and talk to them, then when you get a job or when you come up against something that you've never had to deal with before, that's when you can go like, what do I do now? And the what do I do now doesn't come out of the blue to this person. It comes, they've met you before, they know you. So kind of pave that ground ahead of time so you're not this faceless person who's coming to them later. So know who you want to know is good, and then get to know them. So now here's a specific question. You're a Foley artist.
Pursuing fully, yes.
Excuse me. I don't mean to laugh at this question, but the way this is phrased, I'm wondering if I should do this in a voice.
Okay.
I've only ever seen old people doing that. So what's the outlook for craft sound fields? So let's expand beyond just Foley to talk about this. By the way, I don't actually find that true that it's only old people doing it. But
No, it's,
you talk
I
about it.
mean, I know actually there are a lot of older people that are doing it, and the community of Foley, I feel, is small. And I only actually know of like 2 younger people, meaning like 30s, that actually are professionally doing Foley. And then beyond that, the Foley artists that I know are much older and have had these careers their whole lives. They've only been a Foley artist, and that's great because they've gotten really good jobs and they've been able to keep them. I mean, for me, I do feel like with Foley, it's, unless you're working on like smaller projects in a bigger picture in this post-production world, the Foley artists are older and they have been in it longer.
So what is the future then of Foley? I mean, it does strike me that for certain types of projects, you don't Foley.
Yeah.
And really, with the improvement of really good sound packages, is that as necessary, or someone always has to cut this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think, what's happening in the sound field? Because usually it hits sound
Yeah.
before it hits picture.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff has to do with budget and like how much is really being put into the project. And people can get away with doing their own Foley and not needing the stage. It sounds better if you have the stage, and you'll probably get a better quality, but I mean, because of technology and all these advancements of having your own setup, you can do it, and you can do it okay, and it can work. I I think the future of Foley, I mean,
Or sound in general?
sound in general,
Future of sound. Does sound have a future?
I hope so.
Or will we all talk MOS?
Oh, God.
Now, what do you think is over the horizon for sound craftspeople?
Well, I think where I come from, it's turned into you have your own setup, you have your own equipment, you're able to really do it all, almost all of it. I mean, like in school, it was one person would. I mean, you need to work with other people because that's kind of like what it really is like in the professional world. But because of what we can do with technology and having our own setup, you can do everything on your own. So, well, not, I mean, if you're good, you can do almost everything. And come out with a good product, and it's possible. I don't know, I think that, I'm still trying to understand the question, because it's a big question. Like, what is the future of sound?
Right, well, I didn't help you there, so
No.
I apologize. I will say that when we moved from 35 millimeter film into digital,
Yeah.
Pro Tools hit first before any NLEs did. And so the sea change that happened in terms of what the skills that were needed, in addition to the aesthetic skills, the technical skills, arrived on sound's doorstep first. The shrinkage of the number of people who needed to be used on any given feature film, let's say, happened in sound first. Will this stuff be automated in the future? Will all be, driving or driverless sound people? Will the mix be done automatically, right? We have that cool new ducking feature in Avid, right? So
Well, the
you don't
sound
need
mix-
people to do it. What's that?
We finally reach a complete sound effects library. All the sounds have been recorded.
Oh yeah, well that's actually been a topic with Foley. Is like,
Yeah.
because can you cut it? Is that's the question? Can we cut it, or do we have to perform it? And yeah, and then that's actually been a question in the Foley world. Is like, can we cut it, or is it? Can we? There's like been programs created like to just automate it, or put it in there when they see it's happening and just program it. But there is something about Foley with the human element, I think, that really is why it's still around, why it still thrives. I think there's, something to the cloth movements that if a Foley artist performs, it's better than a computer performing it. I don't know, like how that would work even. So there's still a natural element of Foley that I think is what the Foley world is thriving off of. And I hope it continues to thrive off of it, because I enjoy that a lot. I enjoy performing sound effects. I think it's a really cool world, and working with people at the same time and being creative. I mean, what else could you want? But there is the idea that like technology could easily take over, and suddenly the human element is just not going to be there, and that's scary.
So you brought something up that Harlan, you also talked about before. We've tended to dwell a lot on the technical skills, but a lot of what we do in the narrative world, and let's also remember, by the way, that the largest sectors in post-production and production are not what we're talking about here. It's government video, it's wedding and event video, which are fantastic careers for people, by the way. I'm not separating those out, except that their needs are different.
And they won't shrink as much too. Just to quickly get back to the sky is falling, like that's not an area that people are freaking out in.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's what you want to do in post production, definitely do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
At the last WEVA conference, a Wedding and Event Video Association conference, there were more things there than ever before in terms of usage of drones and some really cool experimental editing techniques and all of that. But that aside, in that world as well as in our world, there's a whole creativity side here, which Google may want to bottle it up and quantify it, not sure that we can. Can we talk a little bit about that side of things, about how you feed that part of you, and the way in which that influences how you might take jobs or negotiate for jobs? Because we're getting paid in things other than dollars sometimes when it feeds our creative side. So now that I've teed that one up and I see each one of you is leaping at the chance to answer? Yes.
Well, and and this all relates back to our earlier talk about negotiating when you're green and stuff. Yeah, when you're earlier in your career, there's a perception that you're going to prioritize the cool job, the title, over the actual pay grade. I personally have found for myself that is true, and that
Yeah, I love, you'll get a credit.
yeah,
You don't need money.
work for credit. But we all know about that catch-22 of getting in. You need experience to get the job. You need a job to get the experience. So we all take that first job for $0. We all take that first job for $300 to cut a feature film in the director's basement.
All in?
He might bring you a sandwich at lunchtime.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's that $300
You get a
does not
credit,
include
you get a
the
copy
cheese
of the film
sandwich and the copy of the film.
sandwich.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah.
If it's a good cheese sandwich.
Yeah. I like a good cheese
So,
sandwich.
so creativity, how does that affect?
I mean, you can consider you're asking me, should we consider creativity part of our salary? Is that?
No, how does it affect jobs that you may want to take? How does it affect all the isms we've been talking about?
When I was younger, I was definitely willing to forego money for the cool title or the cool experience so that I could get that next job. And luckily, I had a tolerance for being able to work for very little or to no money for a few years because I had, I didn't have to pay rent. I was living with some family friends and things like that. So I was able to make that trade-off. The older I get, the less I am willing to make that trade-off because I have bills. I'm older, and I've paid for my student loans. I have medical expenses. I have an apartment. I have a cat that wants me to feed it regularly. Things like that. As you get older, people have families. People have kids. You become less flexible financially, and fortunately that feeds into the stereotype that older workers are inflexible and they want to go home and spend time with their kids. That's simply not true. People who value their job and their work are going to be there for the job and the work, assuming that they're being paid a fair wage.
Cat can always eat ramen.
Yeah, the cat does not love ramen. I've tried that. But it's important to stay motivated too. You got to know what you're working for. But I think that's a really damaging assumption too, that younger people will forego money and that you can not necessarily trick them, but that you can kind of incentivize them, because it's not always insidious, that you can incentivize younger people with the flashier title, with the flashier job, with more creative fulfillment. I think people of any age, when I'm 70, I definitely plan to prioritize my creative fulfillment, maybe not ahead of money, but having taken care of my basic financial needs, I hope to have the freedom to prioritize creative work, and we all hope, I think most of us have the goal of getting to a point in our career where we can prioritize.
Where we have choices.
Where we have choices, yeah. Hopefully you've got more than one job offering some work, and that you're able to choose between the two, which one you like better, work for a show that you like.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like I've had a similar experience with being young and having a higher tolerance for low-paying creative work, because it's sort of like what you said, when you're older you hope to have the freedom, and then when you're younger, to a certain extent, depending on your resources, a lot of people have more freedom to accept creative projects that don't pay as much or don't pay at all. Because you don't have as much expenses as you do in your mid to late 20s, late 30s, 40s, etc. So to a degree, I think it comes down to your ability to weigh what you're getting out of it and what you're going to get out of that job and stuff like that. Because I've taken jobs recently that haven't paid but are amazing creative projects that I loved working on. And that didn't cut too much into my other work that I was doing at the time. So I think that is really important too.
Were you doing them simultaneously or one right after another?
Simultaneously, yes.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to take a creative job, or a project that doesn't really pay that much or doesn't pay at all, you really have to weigh how much that workload is going to affect your other responsibilities. Because if you have another full-time job already, or a freelance job or what have you, then that should be your priority because you already have that. Like, if you're already working a full-time job and a freelance job and another project comes along the way, like, you're like, oh yeah, like I'd love to like jump at the chance to do this, blah, 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 blah. But then taking that job completely destroys your ability to do all three, then it kind of defeats the purpose of taking the job in the first place because you signed up for something
That's good
that's
advice.
more than you can chew.
That's very
So
good advice.
definitely have some foresight when you take jobs in terms of how it's going to affect the other jobs that you have, because if you underestimate how much the new job like has to offer in terms of what you're doing, like what your workload's going to be, then it can affect the other job that you already have and the relationships that you have in that other job. So that's a really important thing to consider.
Can I quickly add too? If you're working multiple jobs, if you're working 2 gigs at the same time, which many of us do, make sure at least one of them is not lowballing you, and even if that means you need to take a job that's not in post or in what you want to do, because that's I'm really big on creating freedom in your life. And you know, that means if you need to work as an accountant 20 hours a week so that you can work for free on a feature film that is, you know, paying you in an excellent experience and an excellent credit, but it's $0, that's how you make that freedom in your life, you know, and, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also going off of that, as much as you think, like, again, this depends on the person's case-by-case basis, but like, in my experience, it's like, as much as I think I can work, like, Monday through Sunday, like, 8 hours a day, or like 8 to 12 hours a day, like, every single day, there comes a point where you're just like after the first couple weeks, where you're just like, why did I do this to myself? So,
And you get
burnout.
pissed off. You get pissed off at it too.
Yeah, and then that-
none of your jobs.
That affects the quality of your work, it affects the
Yeah.
quality of your relationships at those jobs. There's no
Mhm.
point in taking that gig for the networking if you're not gonna be your best
yeah,
when you
so.
show up.
Yeah, like it really affects your work ethic, which should be your number one priority in whatever
Because that's
job
your
you're doing.
reputation, and that's your,
Yeah, exactly. So from my experience, it's really important for me to create personal spaces for myself to recharge and to invest in things that I love doing that aren't work. Because if you invest in yourself in those personal spaces, then it'll make you feel that much better going into whatever job you're doing. Like, it'll just give you that much more energy and that much more productivity in whatever you're doing, because you have something to look forward to instead of just keeping your head down 7 days a week.
So part of what I hear both of you saying, I remember at Edit Fest several years ago, Sally Mankey said that what she would encourage everybody to do is to minimize your monthly expenses to such a degree that then you can start to create those choices for yourself.
I fully agree. I tell everyone that. That's like the first thing I tell everyone is learn to live on $0 a month.
Yeah, I could learn that.
Yeah.
So,
And that means doing weird things with your life, man. No, I mean seriously. Some, you know, like I haven't
could you explain that?
I haven't owned a television in 8 years. People find that shocking. They're like, but you work in TV. I'm like, well, okay. I live in Manhattan. Time Warner Cable is $120 a month. I don't have a well, you know, like that's why. That's $120 a month.
so you got internet service at work? Is that what you're saying?
I would go over to like a lot of my friends had TVs and cable packages at their house, or you can go like, you know, if you're into sports, there's always a bar that has the game on. You know, sometimes that means you know, you're not current on your favorite shows. Like I watched Mad Men 3 years later on DVD from Netflix because I didn't have a TV during that time because I was making a documentary and I needed that $120 a month, man. That was my food, those groceries.
So prioritization is.
Prioritize and sacrifice, and you know, because the more birthdays you have, the more expenses you will have in life, just naturally. my cell phone bill goes up every year, you know? It's like, well, I didn't used to have a smartphone. The year I got a smartphone, that was a huge investment for me in like myself as a freelance business. I finally got an iPhone because I missed a gig by 3 minutes on an email chain when I got up to go refill my coffee, and I sat back down at my laptop, and literally in the space of the 3 minutes that I've been away from my laptop, I missed a gig, and I was like, all right, I'm getting an iPhone.
Never gonna happen again, right?
And that'll never happen again.
So my smartphone is reminding me to begin to wrap up. So this is the downside. If I'd been away from this for 3 minutes, we'd still be talking now. I would like to perhaps wrap it up with a question about confidence. Because I think to some degree, this kind of spans all ages. And post-production people, at least historically, have not been overly self-confident and have kind of hidden themselves away in little small dark caves. Less so now than it used to be, but can we talk about confidence in the workplace when you start out? And I would broaden that into even today. I struggle with that a lot. And let me just add one quote to that, which is from this great interview that I read from Francis Coppola. This was after he had done Godfather 2, so he had done Godfather 1, Godfather 2, because that's how numbers work, and also The Conversation. And he says he wakes up every morning worried that today's the day that they find out. And there's not a single creative person who I know who doesn't immediately understand what that means. People who are not creative go like, what did he have to worry about? You know, he was doing pretty well back then. But creative people understand it. And that's sort of at the root of confidence, that we're always putting ourselves out. So I'm wondering if each of you can sort of wrap it up by bringing us home, talking about confidence, building confidence, how you dealt with it. So let's start down at this end, because, let's start in the middle.
Okay.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
good.
Well, one thing that just popped into my mind was something I've read recently is you are your best investment. And I think part of building confidence is knowing that it takes taking care of yourself, knowing yourself, and learning things about yourself. And then you can approach things with a confidence. Like your confidence comes from, within, and it's affected by exterior things, but it has to, it builds up because you're I'm losing my train of thought here. Excuse me, sorry. But
No
yeah.
more late night working for you.
Yeah, sorry about that. But you go, because I'm just losing my train of thought now.
There's
I'm
police
just like,
sirens outside for those of you who can't hear on the live stream.
I'm like,
It was
yeah.
perfect. Yeah,
Go ahead, you
holding
go
for
ahead.
sound.
No, I think you make a
We'll
valuable
hold for
point.
sound.
yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I have to go now. Every damn day, man. Like we wake up and today's the day they find out. Confidence. What do
So
I
how
say
do you
about
beat that, actually?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. Me personally, I was raised as a performer. I was a ballerina, so I just like, for real, every day when I step outside my front door, I feel like, okay, I'm acting for the whole day now.
Mm-hmm.
And you just go and you adult for the day, and then you come home at the end of the day, and you can, you have to put on your big girl panties and go out and deal with it at the beginning of the day, and then you come home at the end of the day, you take your pants off, and you go, what just happened? But I've noticed that, like, I just repeatedly remind myself that no one looking at me knows that I'm freaking out, man. Like, they don't know. Like, they just don't. And also I'm loud, and you just do one of these, and people don't know that you're nervous. I don't know, but I'm incredibly nervous right now.
Does it get easier at all the more you do it?
It does get easier because I keep telling myself, I'm like, okay, like last time this happened, and by this I mean like that I'm melting down, thinking, oh God, this isn't gonna work out or whatever. I lived, and I woke up, and then I lived through the next day, and I lived through the next day, and then I lived through the next day. It's like when you get a cold and you can't taste the orange juice, and you're like, will I ever taste again? Like, cause like 3 days into a head cold, you're like, you don't even remember what food tastes like. But you can remind yourself, like, this will eventually get better. Yeah, so I just do that every day, and I literally just remind myself that no one knows that you're freaking out inside. No one can tell from the outside.
They can.
They
Actually,
know, they know,
right.
yeah.
Right.
I just keep telling myself it's worked out so far, it'll keep working out, and I'll just stay here as long as I'm welcome, and when they ask me to leave, they'll ask me to leave, and I'll be okay with that.
Okay. There's way too much psychotherapy in that. Harlan.
Speaking of psychotherapy, I think actually it's really important to be your own therapist. Going off of that, from my experience, it's so important for me, and it's something that took me forever to learn. It's really hard to practice. Is something that really helps my confidence is focusing on my accomplishments and not zoning in on like my failures and like tiny little failures, because we're all human beings, we all make mistakes. I was like 15 minutes late this morning, it sucked, but you know, like the thing is you have to focus on your accomplishments. You can't let your failures get the best of you, because they were like, if you zone in on things that you've done wrong in the past, or like mistakes, or like things like if you screwed up a job or like something like that, if you focus on that, then you'll never forgive yourself for it. And it's so important to forgive yourself for those mistakes and focus on like, if like once you do that, you turn around and you're just like, oh hey, I'm actually fine, like I'm doing so well, and like that didn't even really mean that much. So it's so important to like focus on your accomplishments, because it'll change your whole attitude. Like it's so important to have that attitude towards things, because then you will only continue to accomplish things and continue to accomplish your goals. And for me, like from my experience, it's so important for me to have that perspective, because that's what keeps me going, like every day. Like even on my crappiest day, I'm just like, okay, here are 3 things that I did right today, here are 3 things I'm grateful for. Like, you know, you have to have that perspective in order to keep going. Like it's so helpful and it's so healthy. Like it's just how I get by.
Do you meditate? A lot of people meditate, and that's good. Yoga?
Is-
You a yoga person?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, me
Does playing Animal Crossing count as meditating?
Yes, it actually does.
Okay, yeah.
It actually does, and so does coloring in your coloring book.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
adult,
cooking
yeah.
dinner,
Mhm.
having
Yeah.
rituals to ground you. Yeah.
Having Grace Jones on vinyl.
Yes,
That's the secret
that is a
to success.
meditation.
It's a very deep meditation.
It's the on vinyl part that I think is really
Yeah.
special.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Because there's a ritual there.
exactly, yeah.
So that's great. If I can just sort of wrap these all together, because I think some really good advice right in here. Is something that a therapist once told me. Did I share too much?
Interesting.
Is it's too hard to do the big stuff, so just do little baby braveries. And when you do that one, then you can dwell on, I did that. I did that. Don't write the script where you have lack of confidence. Don't continue to rewrite that. Why? Because everybody has that. So I think this is great. Thank you so much for sharing, for being part of that, Harlan, Elin, and Megan. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks so much. Don't forget, at some point in the near future, there's another one of these.
Kylie's going to tell us about it.
Thank you to our hosts.
Thank you for the space and the snacks. If you're on the live stream, you don't get the snacks, sorry. So yeah, thank you for everyone for coming, and the panelists. We sure covered a lot of ground. We learned a lot about Megan. I hope that if you have more to add to this discussion, that you'll go to the Blue Collar Post Collective Facebook group. We've had a lot of really lively discussions about this and all the other topics. And we always have people from all over the world posting questions and comments and articles on there. So it's a great place to connect and meet more people and expand your network. And the next meetup is October 1st. So go on the Facebook page and RSVP so you remember, you don't forget. It's in Hollywood at the Powder Room. They do happy hour the whole time we're there. And they have food too. Yay! And if you're not in LA, there's also meetups in New York. And you can create your own meetup groups. Yay!
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you very much for coming. And you can find this on YouTube and send it to all your friends.